And now we have with us the man himself, the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And good afternoon.
Excellent. Well, great to have you here with us. And as I said, many times we're not used to hearing politicians tell people to strike or certainly encouraging it, and certainly not a general strike. So I have to ask you, what about this moment compelled you to send this message at this time?
Well, first of all, thank you all for the work that you do. And, when you have a sitting president declare war on American cities, the best way to beat back against authoritarianism is through collective action. As the son and the product of the labor movement, the civil rights movement, it's the great potential that Dr. King imagined when he spoke before AFSCME in 1967, that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement were to ever collide, what enormous potential it would have. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing. But the war that this president has declared on the city of Chicago and working people across America, this is the time for us to be united, because clearly the ultra-rich and billionaires are united. And if we're going to beat back against this tyranny and authoritarianism, workers all over the country, quite frankly around the globe, have to be even more united.
Well, Mayor Brandon Johnson, you got me fired up watching that clip again. And I got to ask, how has the reaction to this been? Have any other unions or elected officials reached out to you? And I know you have a longstanding relationship with labor unions across Chicago. So do you think this is going to spread? Should people start working towards this?
Well, absolutely. I believe that the climate is ripe for this, right? Because you have small business owners that are relating with the very working people that they hire. And so whether you're in a union or not in a union, we're all profoundly impacted by this, unconstitutional overreach by this president. But we're also clear about how the spread of right-wing extremism around the globe has left so many people in peril and in despair. And so we know that there's already a movement that has been in the midst of organizing for some time, May Day 2028, where you have UAW and other internationals and locals that have already begun the work of uniting their contract fights around the same time period. I mean, this would be, I believe, a remarkable a manifestation or even expansion of our movement to see workers united all collectively around what workers and working people deserve. If they're not involved in the May Day 2028, I'm recommending and encouraging as many people to become a part of this effort as possible.
So I also like to ask you about the role of mayors in this moment, because, we've had a lot of activists come on this program and express some frustration that Democratic mayors and Democratic governors, they have spoken against Trump and the ICE and federal deployments. But then when push comes to shove, there's the local and state police that end up conducting crowd control operations and sometimes arrests. And in many ways that ends up protecting ICE. And they're saying, it should be the violent, masked, unidentified armed men who are conducting this mass racial profiling, right? Who should be arrested, not them. So I'm curious what your view on that frustration is. And then I know you've also signed an executive order creating these ICE-free zones, but do you think that would actually keep them out?
Well, listen, that frustration is felt by me, right? And, of course, I wear my mayor's hat all day long, except for once I go home. Then I'm dad and husband, and my polling certainly goes down once I get in the house. As dad, not as mayor. But look, I'm someone who have taken on Democratic mayors, right? And I'm on the fifth floor right now where my office is, and the elevators that are held for me were elevators that I blocked and stood in front of and took arrests in front of the very elevators that are held for me. So I certainly understand that level of frustration. What I've made a commitment to doing is, using every single tool that's available to me as the chief executive of this city. And that includes executive orders, like one, making sure that we're protecting the fundamental right to peacefully assemble. In the event that federal troops make it harder or attempt to obstruct that. Two, to create ice-free zones where, I don't want federal agents setting up in public parking lots and public spaces to administer the type of terror that's happening. And I just want to take a quick moment here just to acknowledge all of the people who are on the ground in the city of Chicago and really across America, but particularly in Chicago, volunteers that are showing up as essentially as first responders, rapid responders. And, we've seen footage of federal agents provoking residents into their, work to ultimately harm these individuals, right? Where a woman was snatched from her car and forced to the ground, and another woman who was shot multiple times. A faith leader was shot outside of the city of Chicago, but shot right in the face with pepper balls. Journalists are being detained. I mean, this is authoritarianism like we've never seen it in modern history. So I do get the frustration, the question of whether or not it'll work. The reason why I'm saying that workers have to unite in this moment is because it can't just be a legal battle. It can't just be through executive authority. We have to take it to the streets in the neighborhoods to send a very clear message to the authoritarianism that's being promulgated throughout this country, that we will use our economic prowess to beat back against these acts of tyranny, because we're all impacted, whether you are documented or not. They're coming for working people. They're coming for poor people. And the only way we're going to disrupt this moment is by being collectively united as workers.
Mm-hmm. And you were certainly drawing on some powerful cultural artillery in your call, talking about our ancestors' role in the general strike that ended slavery. And shout out to W.B. Du Bois for providing us with that framing. And you think about that strike, and that was one where they were risking it all, even their lives, to run away and do different things. You think about what took place at Selma, where everything was declared illegal in terms of marching, including federal injunctions. They still went forward. The entire civil rights movement, the entire abolitionist movement, which called for a higher law, that legality was sort of second to justice. And I think that's why we revere those things to this day. And so in a moment like now, when Trump is already criminalizing dissent to such a degree, raising the specter of things like the Insurrection Act, how do you respond when people say that, well, something like a general strike might be illegal or might draw down repression from the Trump administration?
Yeah, look, this moment is going to require all of us to take more risks. Because here's the thing, if we don't take these risks, think about what we will lose. And this is not just simply about restoring our democracy to what it was prior to Trump, because it's clear that wasn't working for a lot of people, right? And so that's why in this moment, we have to be thoughtful about how we reshape democracy in a way that actually shows up for everyday people. And so I see this as more of an offensive act, right? Because too often, progressive folks or those on the left, there's a knee-jerk reaction to defend. And I get it, right? Because I've been in that defensive posture. But that is not sustainable. And not to use too many different analogies, but everyone knows that if the defense is on the field long, that's not a good sign, right? And so we're clear in Chicago about what we have to do in order to defend, but also to be offensive in our approach to make sure that working people and our values are front and center. And so that's why I said it wasn't just about the call to action. It's about what we are fighting for. We want to make sure that our schools are fully funded. We want to make sure that healthcare is available for every single person. We want to make sure that transportation is accessible, good paying jobs, right? Of course, and affordability in housing. So when I go back to, what my ancestors fought for, post the Civil War, there were 5 simple demands: education, housing, transportation, good paying jobs, and healthcare. I hope I got them all. And those are the demands that I believe that working people can rally around. So it's taking risks, but it's also reshaping our democracy in the formation that will outlive all of us. And that democracy has to reflect the interests of everyday people and not the ultra rich.
Well, Chicago always been at the center of the fight for socioeconomic democracy in this country. We think that'll continue. We'll keep following it. Mayor Brandon Johnson, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.